Hello and welcome back to Tell Me Your Ghost Story. I'm your host, Cassie Askin, and today we hear Alix's stories. Alix has a hereditary gift of seeing ghosts, and she was kind enough to tell us all about the many ghosts she's seen throughout her life. So without any further ado, let's get to Alix's stories. Hi, Alix. Tell me your ghost stories.
Hi. Okay. I am going to start from the beginning. It's actually going to go before I was born. So I am what I refer to as a ghost conductor. So I have many, many ghost stories. I believe that it's kind of something that runs in my family. This is what I've been told. My mom had an uncle and he had the gift. That's what they call it. I kind of like refer to it as The Shining. Like if you've ever read that book or seen the movie, it's just like an extra sense. And he would see ghosts and he could kind of tell the future sometimes. He would know things about people before they happened. And he actually drank himself to death. It's a very sad story. But my mom always said that it was because he couldn't handle, his gift was too strong. And I have a couple other family members that the gift has been passed down to, and I am one of them. The other one is my mom's brother. So I have one uncle who has The Shining, or is a ghost conductor, and then myself. To my knowledge, most of my cousins have had some ghostly experiences. My mom as well, but my uncle and I have it happens a lot. Since I was a little kid, it became really clear once I started talking that I was sometimes communicating with people that weren't there. My mom would get a little freaked out about it. Both of my parents would be a little freaked out about it. Yeah, I would have full on conversations. They thought it was maybe imaginary friends, but it became very clear that I was having complicated conversations with people that weren't there. Now that I'm older, I can remember some of these things and some of these people. I think the first ones that I really remember, there was my grandma's house is going to come into this story a lot. So there's several ghosts from her house, but when I was a little kid, the first ones I remember were these two children that would come out of the bathroom walls to talk to me. And it was a little girl and a little boy. The little boy was a little bit younger than the girl, and they had very old-timey clothing on. I didn't think about it when I was a kid, but they were wearing like velvet. Like the girl had a little velvet dress that was kind of burgundy, and the little boy also was like dressed nice and kind of like an early, I wouldn't know, at the time, but kind of knowing now a little bit more about history and fashion. It was maybe like early 19th century. And I used to play with these two little kids at my grandma's house, and everybody thought they were imaginary friends. And I had a cousin who's a couple years younger than I was, and she started talking to them too. And then even when I wasn't there, she would play with these two kids. And she had older siblings, and they were all really creeped out by this because, we would call them by name. We were very active in our playing with them, and it was just her and I. She's a year younger than me, and we were about the same age. We would play with these two little kids. So fast forward many years, the cousin who would also talk to them, her older sister, who was my other cousin, she was at my grandma's house when I was probably in college. So she's at this point in her like late 20s. She has a daughter. They were at my grandma's house alone taking a nap. And in the middle of the nap, my cousin's daughter, who was maybe 3 or 4, sat up straight in bed and yelled the two names of the two little kids and said, "Stop poking me." And my cousin hadn't heard those names since my other cousin and I were little, and she grabbed her daughter and ran out of the house. There are a couple of ghosts at my grandma's house that several people have seen. Some other people have seen the two little kids, but mainly it was me and my cousin Chiquita who saw these kids. And I very clearly as an adult I remember what they looked like. And even, my grandma's been passed for many years, but she lived in that house until she died. And I would go there as an adult, and sometimes I'd be in the bathroom, peeing, just kind of like expecting these two little children to walk out of the walls. I still remember very clearly how they would come to us and we would play. Also at my grandma's house, there was a few other ghosts that we would see. One in particular would come to me a lot when I was a teenager. I didn't see her a lot as a kid. There was a young woman there, maybe a little older than I was. If I was a teenager, she was probably like 21, like very young woman, in a nightgown. And I would just see her all of the time, and particularly in my grandma's room. If I was walking by her bedroom going to the restroom, this young woman would just be sitting at the end of her bed staring out the window, and I would see her all the time. And I have a couple other relatives who had spent the night with my grandma, who had also seen this woman at the end of their bed. She's very nice. She's a nice ghost. So, like as I've explained, there was several ghosts in my grandma's house, and we had seen them all multiple times. There was also footsteps of a man that we would hear at night sometimes walking. It was like gentlemen's like dress shoes would be walking from the bathroom to the kitchen, and then from the kitchen back. We'd hear it like once a night. It happened pretty consistently. So there were these things that would happen that were common. We knew them. It's fine. Everybody's very sweet. That nobody's gonna hurt you, but there are spirits in the house, and we all know that. And one time I was in college, I believe, and I came back home to visit, and I didn't have anything to do. My grandma had a bunch of hospital appointments to go to that day, and like nobody could take her around. So I was like, yeah, I'll go take her around. And so we hung out all day. We were out of the house, and at the end of the day, I drove her back to her house. And she was getting a little older. She was having some health problems. So I had to help her into the restroom. And as I left the restroom, I was walking into the kitchen. And walking to the kitchen, you pass by the living room. And as I passed by the living room, I saw a woman. She didn't look familiar. I had never seen this woman before. I'd seen all the same ghosts in my grandma's house my whole life. And this was a new woman. She looked Native American. She was sitting on the floor next to a pile of clothes that my grandma was folding, and I was very alarmed. And we locked eyes, me and this woman, and then she kind of dissipated. And it was a little frightening because I've never seen this woman, and I've seen all the same ghosts in this house, and I was a little concerned, but I didn't want to scare my grandmother because I was about to leave. I was like going to leave her in this house. I didn't want to be like, hey, by the way, you got a new ghost. Bye. So I helped my grandma out of the bathroom. I go home. I don't tell anybody about this experience. And my uncle was supposed to arrive that night because my grandma's having health issues. Him and his wife were arriving to her house. So I go home. At some point in the evening, my uncle and his wife show up at her house. The next morning, I come back to my grandma's house with my mother, and my grandma's in the hospital. We go and meet my uncle and my aunt. And I first thing go to use the restroom, and I'm walking through the living room, and on the mantle there is a picture of the woman that I had seen the night before. And I was like, well, who's that? Like, where did this come from? And my uncle was like, oh, that's your great grandma. And my great aunt, my grandma's sister, had mailed my mom's Mexican. So one of my aunts in Mexico had mailed this photo to my grandma, and they grew up super poor in Mexico. Like there are no photos of this woman that exist. I think this might be the only photo, which is why I've never seen a photo of her. And she was Mexican, but she was Apache. And I'd never seen a photo of her. I saw this woman on like sitting in my grandma's living room the night before, and I was like so freaked out. I still didn't say anything. I just walked into the bathroom, just like collect myself. I was like, what is happening? That's wild, because I've seen many ghosts in my life, but I've never seen anyone that was connected to me, like nobody that I would was a relative or in any way somebody that I would have known. And when I exited the restroom, my aunt was saying that the night before, when they had arrived a couple of hours after I had left her house, my grandma was crying. They walked in the house, she was crying, and they were really freaked out. They were like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Like, what happened? And she was like, I know I'm gonna die. I know I'm gonna die. And you're like, what happened? And she said, after Alex left, she was like, Alex just left a couple hours ago. After she left, I was sitting in my living room, and my mom came to me. My mother came to me and just stood in my living room and like looked at me. So I had seen who I didn't know was my great grandmother in the same room. And I didn't say anything. A couple hours later, my grandma saw her as well, who was her mom. It's just, I think that's like my favorite ghost story that I have. I think it's really special to me because that's the only time I've ever seen somebody that was, somebody connected to me. And my grandma didn't die right then. She lived for a couple of years later. So it wasn't a bad omen. I think her mom, I mean, I don't really know what ghosts are, but I think she just came to, she knew my grandma was alone or something and just, wanted to check on her baby, I guess. That's my favorite ghost story. Now we'll go back in time a little bit. I have a really good hotel ghost story from when I was a teenager. So most of my ghost stories are not ghost stories, but ghost experiences, I think have been very quick, I'll see something that's just not there. I'm looking at a person and they just kind of dissipate, but there's a handful of stories that stand out. And this is one of them. I went to Prescott, Arizona to visit my white grandmother. She lives in Arizona. We stayed at this old hotel. And if you've ever been to Prescott or you know anything about Prescott, it's like the Wild West. This is a very famous old town where all of these like gunslingers and outlaws hung out. And there's this famous downtown area called Whiskey Row. And there's some very historic places there. And we stayed at one of these historic hotels. And I didn't know it was known for being haunted, but I found out later. So we arrived at this hotel. I was probably 16 or 17 years old, and we get into the hotel room. I went in to take a shower, and it's a very, very small bathroom, like the size of a closet, because it's from the 1800s, this hotel, so the bathrooms are very small. And I was taking a shower, and when I take a shower, I don't know about you, but I just throw my clothes everywhere. I'm getting in the shower, clothes are just going on the floor. And when I come out of the shower, all of my clothes are folded very neatly on the back of the toilet, like sitting, on the very back of it. And I was confused. I dried off. I went poked my head out to the room where my brother and my parents were. I was like, did any of you guys happen to come in and go to the bathroom when I was in the bathroom? And everyone was like, no, you've been in there for like 5 minutes. We're just sitting here watching TV. So absolutely nobody came in. I did not fold my clothes. And yes, so there's a very kind ghost at, I think it's called the St. Michael in Prescott, Arizona. If you guys are ever interested in visiting a haunted hotel. Okay, so I have two other ghost stories. I have one that's a little scary though. I've only had very positive ghost stories. Not necessarily positive, but I guess like mundane ghost stories, they're usually just kind of like, oh, okay, that just happened, that was weird. I had one very negative kind of, I guess evil is the only word I can describe this as, experience where there was something that was not kind. I was in college. It was a little bit after this hotel experience, so I was probably 18 at this time, and I was visiting my hometown and I went to stay with my grandpa. He has an attic that we never ever went into. I spent a lot of time with my grandfather. He like pretty much, him and my grandma kind of raised me, or they largely raised us as my parents worked. And so I was at his house a lot, but we never went into his attic. He had a couple of spare bedrooms up there, but they were kind of hoardery and there wasn't a lot in there and it was a little creepy. And so they cleared out one of the bedrooms for my brother and I to stay in. So I'm, staying with my little brother in this room, and I just didn't have a good feeling about it. I'm somebody who falls asleep instantly. The second my head hits the pillow, I'm out. And I just couldn't sleep. And I was like feeling a little restless, and I just felt like something was off and something was wrong. My brother fell asleep instantly. So he's sleeping next to me. I'm just like having the hardest time sleeping, and I just can't escape this feeling of dread creeping over me for no reason. I just thought I was being a baby because, I'm a little creeped out by my grandpa's attic. And then all of a sudden, I kind of experienced this paralysis. And I've discussed this with people. Everybody's like, you fell asleep and you were just having a night terror. But I wholeheartedly believe that this is not true. I was very conscious this whole time and I'm very terrified, too terrified to fall asleep. But I all of a sudden like felt like I could not move. It was like as if something slowly warm was pressing on my stomach, like right here and just pushing through me. It felt like there was a hand that like pushed through my body and was pinning me to the bed. And in that same moment, my little brother shot up from like a dead sleep, still his eyes are closed, and he started making the scariest noise I've ever heard. His jaw started like rotating and he started making this like it was so scary. It's the scariest thing I have ever seen in my whole life. Like I'm a little kid just like shooting straight up and doing this, and his eyes were fluttering like as he's doing it. It was so scary. And in that moment, I felt like this dark energy at the end of the bed grab like a physical like hand, like this cold hand grabbing my ankles, and I got yanked to the bottom of the bed. Fully, it was I get scared thinking about it now. And I as it pulled me to the bottom of the bed, I kind of like shook free and I and in that moment my brother just like collapsed back onto the bed. dead asleep. And I just go and I shake him and I was like, "What? Are you okay? Are you okay?" And he was like so freaked out, like, "What are you talking about?" And yeah, and then I just, like, sat up in bed, holding my knees, just, like, protecting my brother, just, the rest of the night. That probably happened around, like, 2 or 3 in the morning, and I just stayed up. I did not fall asleep for 1 second that night. I just spent the whole evening just watching out, and I didn't feel anything for the rest of the evening. Yeah, that was the only time I had a truly, like, terrifying experience. I don't even know if that was a ghost story. That felt more, 'cause I've had so many ghostly experiences where it's like a spirit. This felt like a demon. I don't believe in demons really, but if there ever was one, it was bad. I have one last like big major one that kind of intersects a bunch of people, which was a really odd experience. So my parents still live in this house. It's a house that they bought when I was in like middle school. When I went to college, my parents moved out of that house. They still owned it, but they rented it out to a family. So we hadn't lived there. My parents hadn't lived there for many years. So 4 or 5 years later, this family moves out. My parents are going to move back in. And my dad wants to open an adult family care home, which he ended up doing. He doesn't have it anymore, but he had it for about 10 years in this house. So this kind of the impetus of that, like the very beginnings, that we come back to our house that we used to live in, and it's completely empty because this other family had just moved out. And we were gonna stay there. We're just sleeping on like blow up mattresses, and there's nothing in the house. And this is all of our first time kind of setting foot back in the house. So we're taking like almost like a little tour of our old house, and we're walking around. We all go down to the basement. I come back up early though. My parents are like looking at something, and my brother's down there with them. They're just talking about logistics of something. So I come back up by myself, and I walk through this hallway, and I turn back around, and I'm not very far from the end of the hallway. I'm probably like 10 feet, from the kitchen. The kitchen leads into this hallway. I'm in the hallway. I look back at the kitchen, and a man walks past, like a full ass man, like, not a ghost for what I think, or it looks like a very tangible human. And I got really scared. I thought somebody was in the house. For a second, I thought it might be my dad because he was kind of tall. He resembled my dad in a way, but he wasn't wearing the same clothes. And it like obviously was not my dad, but it was, an old white man. So it was like, he was wearing all black. And right as this entity walks past the door, my parents come up from the basement. So which is at the other end of the kitchen. So like I'm looking into the kitchen, this man walks past, and I'm just like staring, like, what the fuck do I do? I was really scared. And then like maybe 10 seconds later, 20 seconds later, my whole family walks up from the basement. And I didn't say anything. I was really scared, but I was like, that had to have been a ghost. That wasn't a real person. But I went through all of the rooms. I like went through every single room to make sure there was not a real person in this house. And it's not a very big house. Like I guess there's like places, but from the direction he was walking, there were very few places he could have gone. So on the same visit home, I was again at my grandma's house. And my uncle, who I explained early in the episode, has the gift. My Theo was at my grandma's house, and he asked me. This is a couple of days after this experience. Like I had never seen anything, and my uncle is a plumber, and so we were sitting around the breakfast table. Kind of everybody walked away, and so it was just the two of us. And he was like, "Hey, I want to ask you something." He was like, because he's been doing some work for my dad. Now that these people are out, my dad's going to try to open this adult family care home. My uncle's coming in to like, do some plumbing stuff. So he'd been in the house a lot by himself. And I still hadn't told anybody about what had happened the other night because I didn't want to freak anybody out. I was like, it's a ghost. I don't need to scare my mom. It's fine. It's okay. And my uncle asked me, he was like, "Hey, have you seen anything in that house?" And because he knows that I have the gift, and we've never talked about it. And I've never mentioned seeing something in that house. And I was like, you know what's so funny? I never did growing up. I didn't see anything there. I lived there for many years, and I had never seen something. And just the other night, I saw this man, and he was wearing all dark clothes, and he's very tall with white hair. And I was like, yes. And he described exactly the person, very vague description, but still it was the same person. And he had been seeing this, like he was like, same, I had never seen this in your house, in all the years you guys lived here. But recently he was like, I've seen this person walking down the hallways a couple of times. And I was like, oh, that's so wild. Because I hadn't, at that point, I'd never had an experience where somebody had corroborated my story. The thing with my grandmother happened a couple years after that. It was wild. So I was like, okay, this is, I definitely was a ghost, was not a real human that I missed that was like just wandering around our house. Fast forward maybe a year later, 2 years later, my dad has this adult family care home up and running. So there are older people, there are, elderly people that live there, and there are CNAs that help out. So there's like a small staff. It's a pretty small place, but there's people there. And I was home for Christmas, and one of the CNAs, I was standing, talking in the kitchen with her. Just, I had met her before. And so, like, how are you? I just arrived. And she was like, I just want to talk to you about it because I don't know like who to ask, but I know you grew up here. And she was like, I keep seeing something here. And I just want to ask you if you've ever seen it. And I knew exactly. I was like, it's a man. And I described exactly. I was like, he's tall, he's wearing all black. And she said, yes. She's like, he's in the hallways. She's like, I always see him in this hallway here. And then she told me that there was one of the elderly women that was living there had pretty severe dementia. And she's amazing. I love this woman. She's very, very cool. But the CNA was telling me that every time she would be getting this woman ready for bed, that this woman would be looking over her shoulder and say like, hi, officer. Or she would like greet somebody that was at the other end of the room. The CNA would turn around and there would be nobody there. And I'm not 100% sure because this woman had dementia, but I have a feeling, and we talked about it, like if you see a tall man wearing all black, like I think in her head, she was probably seeing the same entity, the same person we were seeing, and just jumping to conclusions that it was, an officer or somebody in uniform. And so that's where her head went. But I truly believe that women all saw this person as well. So that's 4 people within 2 years seeing this person in the house multiple times, many, many times. So yeah, that was a really cool experience. So having that many people kind of, making you feel like you're not crazy. Because sometimes when you're somebody who sees ghosts all the time, you accept it, but you feel a little crazy, especially explaining it to people, like on this podcast. I don't know what they are. I have so many theories, but I truly don't know. I don't know if it's a dead person. I don't know if it's a nut person in like some kind of alternate universe that is just bleeding through ours. I have no idea. It could be so many crazy things, but I know that they're real. Someone from the future. It could be. All I know is that I know what I've seen. I know that I've experienced it, and I know that it's real. And that's all I know. But there's so many factors that are mysterious. But yeah, those are my major ghost stories that I've experienced. There's countless others where it's so interesting because actually I feel like as I'm getting older, something inside of me is hardening and I'm not experiencing it as much. When I was a kid, it would be, weekly. I'd see something weird. I'd see a person and then, they just kind of, evaporate in front of my eyes. But now as an adult, it gets fewer and far between, but it definitely happens once in a while. I'll see something. I was living in Little Armenia, which is like East Hollywood, if anybody's familiar with that. And I was asleep and I woke up in the middle of the night and there was an old man standing at my closet putting on a sweater, just like not even knowing that I was there. And he was fully just, a couple feet away from me. It was a small bedroom, like it's not a big space. And he just literally right next to me, standing above me, because I think I just moved in. So I think I was still on like an air mattress. It was one of my first nights in my one of my first apartments in LA. And yeah, this old man, I watched him fully for like maybe 30 seconds. He was moving very slowly, just like very pained, like, he was old and he was not having an easy time putting on the sweater. And then he just disappeared in front of my face. And I was fully sitting up. I woke up, I sat up and I was like, holy shit, there's a man there. And yeah, he just slowly put it on. And then he turned like he was going to walk out of the room. He was going to start his day. And he just faded in front of my eyes. So that was a really fun one. I liked that one a lot because that was, very specific. You know, a lot of the time when I've seen them, that's kind of like out and about in public that it just, it doesn't really stick out to me. But that was in my room in the middle of the night. And yeah, that one always kind of like stuck. It wasn't even like seeing a ghost. I felt like I was watching just a snippet of somebody's life, that was just had been in that room, a replay of somebody who had been there, who had done that, and they, were just doing their little routine, putting on his little sweater. They're just in the right place, the right time to see that little loop. It's so crazy. Yeah, and that experience made me really feel like I didn't know what ghosts were because a lot of my ghost experiences, especially when I was a little kid, like the little kids from my grandma's house. I feel like those were ghosts. Those were people who lived because I talked to them and experienced them. They had a personality still, and they were animated. You know, this experience with this man felt like it wasn't a real, not that ghosts are people, but it wasn't even like that person was there. It was a replay. It was just like there was a loop, and this little snippet of this moment in time was just on replay for some reason, and I just got to see it. I don't know what ghosts are. They could be anything.
Thank you so much to Alex for sharing her stories. A quick note, housekeeping, if you will. If you are listening to the podcast in real time, I will not be posting for the month of December due to the holidays, but do not worry. I'll be working on editing a bounty of incredible ghost stories I have recorded, and I am very excited to release. Once we come back in January of 2025, I will be posting episodes every other week instead of weekly for some amount of time that I have not determined yet. But of course, I will keep y'all updated as always. Please show us your support by giving us a like, rate, review, subscribe, and a follow. Follow us on Instagram for photos from the show and updates at Tell Me Your Ghost Story Podcast. If you're listening to audio only, there's a video accompaniment over on YouTube, and we got some fun stuff on TikTok at Tell Me Your Ghost Story Pod. If you have a true paranormal story you'd like to share, please email it to tellmeyourghoststorypodcast at gmail.com. Until 2025, my friends, good night to all, and to all a good night. See you next year. Bye.